Just a few days following that encounter with the creature in my room, this odd occurrence took place in my room, again at night after I had gone to bed. I had gone to bed at a normal hour on this particular night. I don't recall having any difficulty falling asleep. And I was awakened by a sense of light flashing in the room. And I opened my eyes. And again, I was on my back, legs and feet together, tightly together, arms at my sides, against my sides, and hands against my legs. A very odd position, again, as if I was standing at attention, lying down. This is not a position in which I normally would find myself in bed. I opened my eyes, and above me, there were two spheres moving in a figure 8 pattern, directly above me, about 2 feet over me. One of the spheres was kind of a yellow gold, the other one was pure white. The H shape went from, again, I'm looking straight up, so from the top of my head down to over the top, just where my legs, your pelvis. So running in the H shape from the top of my head down to over my torso. The two spheres were offset in tracking. They were not on the same track. They were offset by about an inch or so. And it was easy to see that as they ran above me. They were moving quite fast. They made no sound, but it was quite light. They emitted quite a bit of light. They also emitted a tail. There was a trail of light that followed each of these balls of light. And though the balls of light were different colors, the trail for each was white. It was the same color for each. The trails of light were about a foot long, maybe a little more. And the ends of the trailing bands of light disintegrated in a very uneven, ragged manner. And even though the tips disintegrated on these trailing bands, the sides did not. The trailing bands of light were about a ½ inch, maybe a little wide, and the sides of these trailing bands remained perfectly intact, even while bending around the curves of the H shape. They bent. They didn't scatter or veer from that track. It was as if they were confined somehow to that. This display lasted about 2 minutes. I never moved a muscle, which of course is not normal behavior for something like this if you awaken. They were only about 2 feet above me, as I said, so I could easily have reached up to try to touch this thing. I could have easily rolled out of the bed to get out from under this thing. But I just lay there with my legs extended, feet together, arms at my side, and I never moved a muscle. And after about 2 minutes of watching this and sensing no sensation at all, they just vanished. They were there and then they were gone. The room was now dark and I just lay there with my eyes open, looking up into the darkness. I lay there with my eyes open for longer than I should have. It was very unusual behavior. I probably laid there looking up into the darkness for at least a minute. And then my eyes closed. And I opened my eyes, and it was the next morning. Beyond the uniqueness of what I was seeing was my response, which, as I've just explained, was not normal. It was obviously muted. I seemed detached. I made no noise, and I didn't move. And even after such a magnificent display that I got to watch very close up, I went back to sleep without any problem at all. And then when I woke up the following morning, I remembered that all. There was no lapse at all or hesitation in remembering that. And I got out of bed, and like I had done with the prior 2 encounters that year, I went to my desk, got a piece of paper, and wrote down everything that I could remember about it. And over time, I don't believe there was anything about this one where I had any extra details that I added. I believe I remembered this one completely on waking that morning. So those 3 in a row. Now those 2 balls of light moving in that figure 8 pattern, at the time, I did not know that an 8 shape stood for infinity. I didn't know that. I only knew that when I shared this story at a Close Encounters Resource Organization support group meeting. And one of the people in the crowd said, "You know what that means?" And I said, "No, I don't." And they said that 8 shape represents infinity, but they had no explanation for what the appearance of that with those 2 glowing spheres would represent. What I thought was interesting about that particular event was it occurred so closely on the heels of the prior event where the creature was in my room. That had happened just a few days prior. So I believe, well, I believe all 3 of these are connected, but I believe the infinity, the 8 shape above me and the 2 orbs, I believe that is connected to that prior event where the creature was in my room. I believe those 2 somehow have some kind of close connection, where the one that occurred earlier in the year, I don't believe it had such a close connection to that one. Now all 3 of these events, of course, as I said, I had written down, and over time, the first 2, the very lengthy ones, I hadn't been able to record all of the details. I wrote down whatever I could remember when I had awakened, but as days and weeks and months went by, things would pop into my head that had occurred, and I would write all of that down. And eventually, I had quite a lengthy manuscript of those 3 encounters. I had never had anything happen like this in my life that I had recalled. So these 3 things seemed very important to me. They seemed very important. I believe in the second one, where the creature was in my room, that creature was trying to convey a message. which was displayed for me on that transparent panel. The only thing that may not have been part of that message, but it was the only unusual thing I was thinking about, or that came into my head while I was watching those symbols move across the panel. At some point, I recognized that first symbol, which I had misidentified as a fish. I recognized that as a rocket. And what I thought were scales were actually, in my book I call them dots. They were actually very, very tiny circles. Some were open circles, some were closed or filled in. But they were in rows, horizontal rows coming across what appeared to be a cylinder. And there were scores of rows of these things, about 5 in each row. But the only thought in my head at the time was that is a rocket. And each of those little circles represents a human. That is a rocket filled with humanity. And the two crescent shapes with the adjoined appendage that was always trailing the rocket by about 5 or 6 feet across this panel. Again, in my head, that is a symbol that represents an astronomical location. And it is the place from which we come. It's our origin. I cannot know if that is true. I only know it is the only thought that was in my head. I don't know if it was a thought that originated in my head or if that was part of the message that that creature was trying to convey with all of these symbols. None of the other symbols were recognizable. I mean, I've drawn a couple of them, but they don't seem to be representative of anything that we would know. But those two are the only ones that seem to tell a story in my head. Eventually, after writing all of this down in great detail, I was just going to include this in a large envelope, all of this stuff, plus some other stories that I have. For my relatives. Because of my age, I knew that, as we all do, we never know when our time will come. And I am old enough that that could be any day, or it could be a ways off. But I didn't want these stories to be lost to time. So I wrote them with great detail, I organized it, and was just going to file it away. And someone at one of the support group meetings eventually said, "You should write a book. This is interesting stuff." And over time, some other people said that, and I decided, well, rather than put it in a folder where it's just going to be known to my relatives, maybe I could write a book. And who knows, maybe there's some interest by some other people that have experienced stuff like this. and they would want to know about it. So I put it in book form, and that is where we are today.